So Emily Kerr is the owner, founder of Wholesale in a Box, and I came across Wholesale in a Box because personally I was looking for a solution to kind of the whole wholesale puzzle of owning and operating a business. I was becoming kind of really flustered and overwhelmed by just the whole process of finding stores, contacting stores, keeping up with that, and ultimately leading to creating long-standing accounts with potential retail stores for our product. So Emily is the pro in all things wholesale, and she has a platform/subscription service that's super easy to use, affordable, and kind of fits to your goals as a small business. So without further ado, please help me introduce Emily Kerr.
Thank you, David. I'm so excited to be here. I know that all of you are here because you're passionate about what you make, and what I'm most passionate about is helping people do what they love in a way that's sustainable, financially, energetically, emotionally. And with Wholesale in a Box, we've helped, at this point, over 3 years, about 500 makers grow their wholesale business. And, you know, for some people, that's meant going from $10,000 a year in revenue to $100,000 a year in revenue, or quitting their full-time job. So wholesale can be really transformative. But I guess we'll just wait for the train. Give us a second, check on technology. So what I want to talk about today is pull out a few things. We've got a little bit shorter time because we're messing with the technology, but what I want to do is take what we've learned from helping those 500 makers grow their wholesale business and give you some of those tips and tricks and tools and frameworks so that whatever stage you're at, whether you're thinking about wholesale and want to get into that first store, or whether you have 10 stores and want to grow to 100. So take those and help you save time and save headaches along the way. I also want to say right now, there is a lot to wholesale. It's almost like a whole other business. So, you know, there's mental pieces and structural pieces, and then there's all these little specifics around line sheets and wholesale terms and that kind of thing. So a couple things. If we don't get through everything today, take a card. There are a ton of free, we have a whole wholesale training center on our website that's completely free. So take a card on your way out, or it's wholesaleinabox.com. And that'll, you know, you can dig into some of the things we talk about here in a little bit more detail. I'll also be around after the talks, and I'm happy to sit with, if you have questions on your line sheet, if you have a specific question that we didn't have time to dig into, I'm thrilled to sit with however many of you want to and talk about it. So I'm here. So we'll cover what we cover, but we don't have to feel rushed. So the things that I want to cover, this would be like the bullet points on a slide, if there were a slide today, are number one, what we call the 5 rules of growing your wholesale business. So these are kind of the, again, higher level framework things. Whether you're just starting or whether you want to grow your wholesale business, what are the most important elements to have in place in order to do that? Number 2, we're going to cover the brass tacks, the really detailed stuff of what it looks like to make that happen. And I think for a lot of people, it's those brass tacks that are most top of mind for you when you're thinking about wholesale. Again, line sheets, wholesale minimums. What is a trade show? What does that look like? How much does it cost? What do I say in an email to a store? What is the wholesale to retail markup? All of those really specific things. So we'll touch on some of those, but we'll start with the foundations. Before we jump into either of those things, though, I want to talk about why wholesale. What is wholesale, and how to know whether it's something that you should invest in for your business. So how many, just to get a sense actually, raise your hand if you are currently selling to between 0, you're not selling wholesale, to like 1 store, if you have 1 or fewer stores. Okay, and then raise your hand if you're selling to 2 stores or more already. Okay, so we've got a mix, and we can speak to helpful things for both stages. So at its most super basic, just so everybody's like on the same page, what is wholesale? Wholesale means selling your product to stores, usually at about a 50%-ish markup, so that they can in turn sell what you make. And it often involves a level of professionalism that is a next level for a handmade business. So it's often, comes after a handmade business has been selling at craft markets and on Etsy. They'll often make this leap. Why would you make the leap from selling through those other channels that you're probably already selling in to selling wholesale? Okay, so a few things. One is wholesale can be a source of sustainable scale. So a way to grow your business so that it can support you and your family and do the other things that it needs to do, but in a way that's potentially, depending on how you set it up, less draining than going to 30 craft shows a year, for instance. Number 2, people often choose wholesale because it helps you not be at the mercy of OPBs, other people's businesses, right? So whether that's the changing Instagram algorithm or Etsy deciding that they've got some other strategy, if you're only selling through one channel and that channel is someone else's business, that can be a vulnerable place for a business. And wholesale kind of spreads it. If you're selling to 90 boutiques, yes, in a way you're dependent on those 90, but if one closes, you don't even feel it. The third thing is broadening audiences and markets. So if you're here in Knoxville, probably a lot of the people who have heard of you are in Knoxville. But if you start selling to a store in San Francisco, people in press outlets, potential retail customers, and partners will see your work that would never know about you otherwise. And then the fourth thing is evening out seasonal swings. So if you've been doing this for a while, you might be familiar with the concept that there are these like feast and famine periods in your business, which are hard to manage both energy-wise, life-work balance-wise, and cash-wise. And so wholesale can, again, depending on how it's set up, even that out a little bit over the course of the year. So, we hear things all the time like that, doing 30 craft shows a year was fine, but X in my life changed. Or I love what I do, but I really need this to be a sustainable business. I can't keep getting sick and working 18-hour days for the rest of the business. Some people are trying to decide either whether to get into wholesale or whether to double down on wholesale. And so I think it's also helpful to talk about, all right, why not wholesale? So a few reasons why not wholesale. And again, because I don't think wholesale is for everybody. I actually spend a lot of my time talking one-on-one to makers. And sometimes the meat of our conversation is, oh, this is working really well for you. Why don't you keep doing that instead? This, wholesale might not be the best direction for you. So why not wholesale are a few things. One is if your product is wonderful, but it can't actually compete nationally. So a good example of this is if you've been selling at craft markets and people love what you do. Let's say you make lavender soap. And that's wonderful. Also, the people who are coming through the craft markets have a couple of extra incentives to buy from you when they're there. First of all, it's basically a souvenir from their experience at the craft market. And second of all, they probably feel a personal connection with you just based on you being local. When you go up a level to wholesale, suddenly you're competing with lavender soap makers from potentially all around the world, but definitely from all around the country. And so the product itself, without those extra incentives to buy it, needs to be able to compete. The product and the story, which go hand in hand. The other one is if you're still at the very beginnings of understanding your product and understanding your market. So the nice thing about Etsy and craft markets and Instagram is that your interaction with the people that you're serving with your market is very direct. And so you're instantly getting a sense of whether this is working, what they like, what scent they like, whether that change that you made was positive or negative. And when you move to wholesale, some of that is removed. And so if you go too quick, you can cut off your process of understanding your product. The third is margins. The truth is that some products don't have the margin to support selling wholesale. It's rare, actually, and often, we can sit down and talk about an approach to make a tweak to your approach to your product so that your margin will work for wholesale, but sometimes it's just not possible. The fourth reason that wholesale might not be for you is if you already have a large and stable business. Sometimes people come to me and they tell me all about their business and then they say they want to grow wholesale. And I ask them why, because they have this wonderful, thriving business. It's already diversified. Sometimes it makes more sense to double down on what's already working. And then fifth, and this is a big one because I'm not the most patient person, which is a gift and a curse, but if you're very impatient for immediate growth, like let's say you have something that you need to pay for, and that's your motivation, that is a very, very tough setup for growing wholesale. Wholesale tends to happen over the course of 24, 48 months, 3 years. It's these huge shifts, but they take a long time to happen. So wholesale isn't something that happens over the course of 2 and 4 and 6 months for the most part. So I would say, oh wait, we do have slides? You weren't going to tell me? What the heck? Well, I didn't know what that was. Have you been advancing them?
In order to do that, I have to give away this for free. Like, that has to happen, right? I don't want you guys to say, okay, I gotta go pay.
Well, at least I actually prepared, and there was something.
So,
thank you.
That's the premise of all this.
A little review time here in case you missed anything. Where are we at? Wholesale for you. Native Bear. Who knows Native Bear? Yes? Leela. Okay, so quick story to kind of illustrate these pros and cons of wholesale. Leela runs an amazing paper company out of Atlanta called Native Bear. She started working with us 3 years ago and is still working with us, which is so fun. And when she started with us, she had 20 wholesale accounts, which probably to a lot of you sounds like a lot, but was not a huge amount in terms of revenue. And over the course of 3 years, she just persistently did the work every single week, every single month to grow wholesale. And 3 years later, she probably has close to like 175 wholesale accounts. She brought her husband on full time. She started this other venture. She launched this amazing like planner. She's done beautiful things with her line and her business financially and personally because she grew wholesale, but because she did it patiently and over the long term. So that's kind of, if that sounds exciting to you, I think wholesale could be great. If that sounds like a bit of a drag, then wholesale might not be for you. So what are the minimum things that you need? Like, reality check here. First is a great product. Second is some online representation of your work. That doesn't mean a professionally designed catalog necessarily. It doesn't mean, a retail website, a wholesale website, and like 5 different apps connecting them all. It just means some way that somebody in San Francisco can look at your product line and your prices and make a decision. And then the third is a way to connect with stores. And that's what we're going to talk about next. So some starting hypothesis of how the heck you're going to connect your product to the people that you want to buy it. So first thing I want to talk about here is this is really basic, but on the other hand, even for people who are really established in wholesale, they constantly need to be reassessing these pieces. So what are the methods for connecting with stores, and what are some pros and cons of each? The first thing is email or snail mail outreach. And this, I'm a little bit biased because this is what we help people do with my company, Wholesale in a Box. But it has the advantage that you have the power. It's all in your hands, and you can do it to the extent or the scale that is appropriate for you. So this just looks like you directly sharing your product, either by sending them something in the mail or sending them something by email, introducing it and pitching them on why it might be a good fit for your store. The caveats here are that it needs to actually be a great fit for that store. It needs to be a really thoughtful, personal, authentic, and concise presentation of what you do. And, it has the advantage that it's not a $20,000 investment. It doesn't involve hiring anybody. You can do it tonight, right? It has the disadvantage of kind of the flip side of all those things, which is that it's in your hands. So if you don't stay consistent with it, it obviously doesn't happen and doesn't work. It also has the disadvantage that it does involve consistent time from you, even if it's an hour a week, which is what we tell folks to invest in using our platform. Even if it's an hour a week, if you can't find that hour, your wholesale business isn't going to grow. The second is walking into stores, which seems really intuitive. I'm from New York, but it's been really fun being here in Knoxville, and Paris, an illustrator here, told me about Rala, and I walked by, and it's such a beautiful store, so it'd be really intuitive to walk by and say, oh, hey, I'm Emily, I make these amazing prints, here they are, what do you think? And I don't make a lot of black and white statements in business because different things work for different people, but this is the one thing that consistently is a terrible idea. Terrible idea. The reason is that when store owners or buyers are in a shop, that is their only time to make money, to pay their rent, and to feed their kids. That's their time to be interacting with their customers, and so even if there's no one in the shop, the feeling is that you're taking them away from that important work. So I would give that one an X. Trade shows. So you're probably familiar with trade shows. It's kind of like a craft market, except you're vending to stores, not individuals. The crazy reality of trade shows is that the normal investment is usually somewhere between $8,000 and $25,000 once you count the cost of everything, the setup, the booth fees, you have to pay to plug in electricity, to have a chair. It used to be that trade shows were the way you grew wholesale. The only way you grew wholesale was what wholesale was. That landscape has changed a lot. Trade shows have become less effective over time, but I would say for people who already have a very established brand, so like a established brand identity, as well as a fairly established base of stores that they're already selling to, then trade shows can be an effective route to grow wholesale, because in a lot of cases the same stores will come back to see you at the shows and place their order at the show. And if you have an established brand, that's what permits you to be able to stand out in that context where you're, a booth away from Emily McDowell, right? For these platforms, so there are platforms like IndieMe, Indigo Fair, that are, in the same way that Etsy is a platform connecting vendors to individual buyers, these platforms often will connect vendors to store owners. And a lot of people who work with us also do a platform because reaching out to stores is an active method, and a platform is a passive method. So once you sign up, there's usually not a lot you can do if it's not working or you're not getting orders, which is both a pro and a con, because it doesn't take a lot of time from you, but on the other hand, it either works or it doesn't, and that's out of your hands. The other thing about platforms is that it removes the relationships from your business. So the relationships mediated by the platform, which can be, again, helpful at the beginning, but ultimately maybe not a place to put all of your eggs, because if something changes with the platform, that can be challenging for your wholesale business. And the last one is reps. So wholesale reps, you're probably familiar with. You sign up with an agency or a person, they get a territory, and then they sell your product directly to stores. I think for a lot of people, that's like, oh, that sounds great. That sounds like exactly what I need, is for someone else to do it for me. It can be great. It's also hard as a newer line to find a rep who is really effective and really hustling for you, and will also take you on when you don't have a really proven track record of being in 200 stores. So, I thought there was.
Okay, so a B Corp is called a benefits corporation.
There was another slide in there that said, so I should what? All of those methods that we just talked about can be great outreach methods, and you'll probably do, if you grow your wholesale business, you'll probably do a combination of them. And I really, truly mean that they can all be great approaches. They have their pros and cons. I'm going to talk more about direct outreach to stores, where you as the business owner or someone on your team is reaching out directly to stores that you know and love, just because that's what I'm most familiar with, but not necessarily because that's the only way to do it. So I'm just going to get my clock. Okay. So what I'm going to do is go really quickly through the 5 rules. Almost going to skip this section in the interest of time so that we have more time for some of the brass tacks at the end. But there's actually a free email course on our website that goes over the 5 rules. So if you go to wholesaleinabox.com/learn, you can sign up for that. And so if this seems like interesting to you, but you didn't quite get it or we didn't spend enough time on it, go there. The first rule of growing wholesale, these are the rules. Make connecting your job, craft your story, follow up and follow through, cultivate current accounts, and start with good enough and make it better. So these are kind of the principles that we've pulled out. We literally sat down with the data from 400 or 500 makers and said, we work with all kinds of people. What the heck is the common thread here? And these were the common threads. These were the common threads that made the difference between someone that wanted to grow wholesale but just couldn't make it work, and people who are wildly successful at growing wholesale, like Native Bear. So first thing is make connecting your job. This comes from the idea that there is no art without connection. Connection is that piece that completes the energetic exchange where you say, here, I made this, and then someone else buys it or takes it or enjoys it. So most importantly, your job as a maker is not just the making, not just the branding, but really is this piece of connecting with stores and finding ways to do that effectively and authentically. The second is to craft your story. And the issue is that many of us, makers especially, but any human being, often feels like, I'm not good at marketing or sales. But to tell my story well, I have to tell it in pages and pages. Or I often hear, my product should speak for itself. So I'm not going to work on crafting my story. And, I think for people who are able to establish really strong maker businesses, it comes from seeing that all of these elements are elements of your story. And they're also elements effectively of your product. Your line sheet and your product in some ways are not separate things. They're both things that need attention and care and love and skill put into them in order to develop an effective business that's also beautiful and authentic. Follow up and follow through. Okay, so we all think, I wrote her an email, so if she's interested, she'll get back to me. They said they wanted to place an order, but they haven't yet, so I guess they decided against it. I hear that one a lot. I tried doing wholesale outreach to a dozen or so stores, but I didn't hear it back from anybody, so I dropped it. And here is a new way that you could frame each of these. So you could even just take a picture of that or something for later. But the idea is reframing the act of following up with stores so that following up with people who are busy is an act of respect, not of pestering them. It's saying, I value your time so much that I'm going to go ahead and just give you a polite nudge to check back in and see whether you had a chance to review the line. And doing that a couple of times. And then when they say no, that's a no. And you can move on and they can move on. But if they haven't, if they just didn't have a chance to look at the email yet or just got lost, bringing that back up to the top for them is an act of respect. Start with good enough and then make it better. For any of you who are either jumping into wholesale or starting wholesale, I think for a lot of us, it can feel like there are so many elements and we need to have them all great before we get started. The truth is that you don't know what great looks like yet in wholesale because you're not experienced with it yet, for the most part, for most of you. None of us know what great looks like for the next level of our business until we get there. And so that's why it's so important to start with something good enough to start getting out there and getting experience, and then make it better as you go along. Cultivating current accounts and cultivating your relationships with any store that you're currently selling to is probably as important or more important than reaching out to new stores. So I'm not going to dig into the specifics here, but brass tacks. Okay. Does anybody have any burning? We have about 13 minutes left. I can talk about pricing, wholesale terms, line sheets, displays, how to find stores to reach out to. Does anybody have burning things that feel top of mind among those, or other details about wholesale that they want answers to? Pricing? Well, I just happen to have that right here. Pricing is hard. There's no one golden simple answer for pricing. I would say if I were going to communicate a couple things about pricing, though, for wholesale, it would, number one, be that if you're selling to Nordstrom, Anthropologie, your wholesale markup is likely going to have to be far more than 2 times. So if you're selling at wholesale for $1, it's probably going to have to retail for a whole lot more than $2. But if you're selling to independent store owners, Rala, or I even saw a couple of boutiques on that mall area. So they don't all have to be handmade oriented, but if you're selling to independent boutiques, you can usually just do 2 times. You sell it to them for $1, they sell it for $2. So you can wholesale. The difference between wholesale and retail, there's a world of nuance there, but if you need a rule of thumb, 2 times is a good rule of thumb. Number 2, there are all different kinds of ways to price. There's value-based pricing, there's cost-based pricing, there's this formula that's up there, which you've probably seen before, would be my guess. There's looking at what your competition is charging. And the truth is that you need to do a combination of both, because often when you're starting out, you can write down this formula and fill in all the numbers, and you're going to end up trying to sell a tea towel for $56 because I don't know if anyone's had this experience, but you're like, yeah, it doesn't add up. So usually what you need to do is kind of triangulate, okay, where does this bring me? That's good to know. What are my competitors charging? What do I think is fair at a gut level for this product? And then sometimes you need to charge a little less in terms of your margin and your profit at the beginning in order to get where you're going, because as you get bigger, some of your costs will start to come down. And so having that combination of factors for your pricing can be really powerful. The last one's interesting. So try to have a good range of pricing in your line. Just something to think about. But if you either have items for $10 and items for $800, so a huge range, or you have no range, so everything costs $50, you might consider having a tight but some range. So maybe there are things for 15, things for 40, and things for 60, or things for, not specifically those numbers, but places where people can, hear about you on Instagram and then get something pretty inexpensive and then kind of graduate up through your line. That's also really helpful for wholesale stores because the lower price items let them try it out in the store without a lot of risk, and the higher price items let them make a little bit more profit and make you a little bit more profit. So that's just a little tip to think about. Any other, what else from the list seems helpful? This one? Choosing stores to connect with. This is my favorite topic. So there's the who and then there's the how. So what stores to connect with? Conceptually, you want to share your work with stores that are stores where the people who already buy from you, the question is, where do the people who already buy from you, where do they shop? Where do they shop when they're in Knoxville? Where do they shop if they're in San Francisco? And you might not always know the answer to that. There's not only one answer, but you can definitely imagine the opposite ends of the spectrum. And it relates to price point, aesthetic, location, the overall feel of the store. So is it really cluttered? Is there a ton of stuff in there? Is it eclectic? Is it super minimalist? And then do they sell the type of products, the family of products that your product belongs to? So if you sell candles, it doesn't necessarily mean that they need to sell candles. In fact, sometimes it's an opportunity that they don't have a candle line. But is your price point in the range of what they sell? Is your aesthetic in the range of what they sell? And are the people that are shopping there similar to the people who are already buying your candles? Then there's the how. So, okay, that's great. You can picture those stores, but how the heck do I find them? That's a big part of what we do and why we exist, because it does take a lot of legwork. And I always think it's better to reach out to 5 stores that you think are going to be a phenomenal fit and that you can throw your heart into saying, yes, you should absolutely buy my product, and being able to stand behind that versus reaching out to 50 stores where you're kind of unclear on whether they should or shouldn't in the first place. Asking other makers who live in other cities, using Yelp, using Google, even things like little articles like Design Sponge city guides or that kind of thing. Start keeping a list, and you don't necessarily have to know everything about the store, but start keeping a list of stores that catch your eye, even if you're not going to reach out to them right away. And then when you are in a phase where you are able to start reaching out to stores, you can kind of come back to that list. One thing that's really helpful to know, so when it comes to wholesale, a lot of people talk about line sheets and they talk about catalogs. And the reason for that is twofold. One is that if you're connecting with stores the ways that I'm talking about, or if you're going to a trade show, again, you need some kind of representation of your line in terms of what products do I sell, what are the wholesale and retail prices, what are my terms, and who am I? You need some representation of that. But the truth is that if you're not using trade shows as your primary route for doing this, and if it's not 1990, then you have a lot of options for what that thing can look like. And people call them line sheets or catalogs. It doesn't matter what the word is, but those are the things that you're trying to achieve. Who are you? What are your products? What are your wholesale and retail prices? And what are your terms? And so there's a lot of options, but 4 options for structuring this are using your regular retail website. And if you have a 2x markup, telling the store owner, go ahead and shop from my retail website with this 2x, half off coupon code. If it's a great representation of your brand, you are done. That's a great way to do it. It's really simple. Oh my gosh, I didn't update this. No more Etsy wholesale, so that's not gonna work. Some people have a wholesale website. So that's similar to your retail website, except totally oriented towards store owners and with your wholesale pricing and with the shopping cart set up to reflect your terms, when they get free shipping, when they don't, how much that costs. And the 4th is often a really simple way to do it, which is creating a document, a PDF. Maybe you make it in Canva or Illustrator or Word. With a rundown of those elements that I talked about. And so that's a piece, and it doesn't have to be print ready. You don't have to print 200 of them and send them all over the country. But having a document that you can email to people, either on request, like let's say someone comes to a craft show and, they happen to be a store owner, they happen to be a buyer, and they requested my, do you do wholesale? Say, give me your email, and then you can go ahead and send that out to them. Or if you're doing proactive outreach to stores through Wholesale in a Box or on your own, that's a really crucial document. And it can be easy to do because all of the other pieces, your website and everything else, don't have to be perfect. And so it sort of like puts the control back in your hands to make this one document a really great representation. This is an example of a line sheet. Any questions before we wrap up? Either questions, other questions, or clarifications of things that we already talked about?
Does that make sense? This is something I really want you guys to walk away understanding. Anyone have any questions?
Sure. So this is an example. What I have up here is an example for a sister company that I own to Wholesale in a Box. And there are a lot of ways to set up a line sheet. Some are more complicated, some are more simple, some are more streamlined. But this is an example of just like one way it can look if you're going to make that document that you're going to email to stores. So some basics are have a beautiful front cover that represents your line well. Have an about page. A great image. This is not a great image, but have a great image and a little rundown of who you are and what you do. Then you can jump into your product pages, and if you have fewer products, each product page can be like a real profile of what that product is all about with multiple photos. If you have more products, maybe you fit more to a page and it's less detailed on each one. You always want to have all of the details for every product, including price, so that there are no question marks. The store owner should have everything they need to make a decision, place an order, and know exactly what they're going to get when they pull it out of the box. So, different types of product pages. You can also intersperse some kind of like lifestyle photos. So, what One Milko makes are these little workbooks, but instead of, you can kind of have, if you have even a handful of great lifestyle photos of your product, you can take 3 or 4 and intersperse them throughout the document to kind of sell their head as well as their heart on what the line's all about. You can include an order form. It's becoming less mandatory. Many store owners are placing orders just by email. So they send you an email with what they want from the line sheet. You send them a Square or PayPal invoice. They pay it, and then you go to work on production. So the order form is optional. If it's easy to do, throw it in. And then your wholesale terms. And a few things that you want to make sure to address on your wholesale terms, and this is whatever format you're using to talk to stores, to communicate with stores, you always want to touch on these elements. It doesn't need to be legalese. It doesn't need to cover every possible scenario. It should be simple, friendly language covering the scenarios that you think are important for your business. Payment and ordering, who covers shipping, who covers insurance. Are there specifics about colors and sizes and packaging that they need to know about? Turnaround time. And all of these are, up to you to set. But the main thing is to be clear from the beginning, and you avoid misunderstandings later. Yeah, so I think I'm going to wrap up with that. But again, we really have a lot of free resources on our website. I will be around later. I think that the biggest things to remember about Wholesale are that you will benefit so much from taking as much as possible of it into your own hands. It can be really authentically fun to connect with stores on a personal level because they're creative, makery people just like you. And I would, again, say, start with good enough, start connecting, and then make it better over time. That's it. Thank you so much for having me.